Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the No Borders English Studio podcast. I'm Tara.
And I'm Ben. Thanks so much for being here with us today. Before we start, just a quick reminder. If you enjoy this podcast and find it helpful, please like and subscribe. It really helps us keep making free English content for you.
Now, a quick note about today's level. This episode is designed for B1 to B2 learners, which means intermediate to upper intermediate level.
But if you're a beginner, don't worry at all. You're very welcome to listen along and just try your best. You're sure to pick up some new vocabulary, and you might understand more than you expect.
Today's episode is also a listening comprehension practice, so you don't need to understand every word.
Just relax, listen for the main ideas, and remember that listening to English is already a great way to improve. And if you're a more advanced listener, I still recommend following along with this episode because the topic today relates to everyone at every stage of their learning journey.
So, Ben, let's also explain how today's episode will work so our listeners know what to expect.
Great idea, Tara. This podcast is divided into 3 main listening sections. In each section, we'll talk about an idea from an article based on research by James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits.
I love this book. Have you read it?
Tara, I have read this book so many times, I could probably tell you word for word, cover to cover what it says without even opening the book.
I love it. It's really helped me a lot in everyday life.
It's honestly changed my life. That's why I'm so excited to talk about this today.
Me too, Ben. So, as we said, this podcast will be divided into 3 sections, and at the end of each section, we'll pause and ask you some listening comprehension questions.
We'll give you time to pause the podcast and answer out loud or in your mind.
Then, we'll come back and explain the correct answers together.
The topic of today's episode is motivation. How to keep going when you feel tired, stuck, or ready to give up.
We'll talk about motivation in general, but we also want to connect it to learning English and to any other goal you're working toward right now.
Before we start the listening practice, let's look at a few key words you'll hear today.
The first word is motivation. Motivation is the feeling or reason that makes you want to do something.
The next word is habit. A habit is something you do regularly, often without thinking.
Another important phrase is long-term goal. This means something you want to achieve in the future, not immediately.
And one more, consistency. Consistency means doing something regularly, even when it feels hard.
Now, a quick question for you to think about. What is one goal you have right now?
It could be learning English, exercising, saving money, or something else.
All right, let's get started with our first section. What motivation really is. Many people think motivation comes first and then action comes after. But according to James Clear, research shows that this is often not true. In reality, action often comes before motivation. In other words, we don't always feel motivated before we start.
We often start first and motivation comes later. For example, you might not feel motivated to study English today.
But if you open your book, listen to a podcast, or study for just 5 minutes, something interesting happens.
Your brain starts to feel progress.
And that progress creates motivation.
So instead of waiting to feel motivated, James Clear suggests focusing on starting small.
Now, get ready to pause the podcast to answer these questions out loud or silently in your mind.
Question 1. According to the article, does motivation usually come before action or after action?
If you said motivation often comes after action, you're correct.
Question 2. What is one small action you could take today toward your goal?
There's no single correct answer here, but thinking about small actions is exactly the point.
Another important idea from James Clear is that people often lose motivation because their goals feel too big.
When a goal feels overwhelming, our brain wants to avoid it.
This is especially true with long-term goals, like learning a language.
You don't learn English in 1 week or even 1 month. Progress can feel slow, and when we don't see results quickly, motivation drops.
James Clear explains that instead of focusing only on big goals, we should focus on systems. A system is the process you follow every day, not the final result.
For example, instead of saying, I want to be fluent in English, a system would be, I listen to English for 10 minutes every day.
Systems help you stay motivated because they focus on what you can control.
Get ready to pause the podcast again and answer these questions.
Question 1. According to this section, why do people often lose motivation?
If you said, people often lose motivation because goals feel too big or progress feels too slow, you're right.
Question 2.
What is the difference between a goal and a system? If you said a goal is the result and a system is the daily process, that's correct.
Now, one of the strongest ideas in James Clear's work is that habits reduce the need for motivation.
When something becomes a habit, you don't need to decide every day. You just do it.
This is powerful because motivation is emotional. It goes up and down. Habits are more stable.
For example, if listening to English becomes part of your daily routine, you don't need to feel excited every time.
You simply press play or open the book or practice some speaking.
James Clear also explains that successful people don't rely on motivation, they rely on environment and routine.
Small habits, repeated over time, create big results.
Last set of questions. Get ready to pause the podcast one more time.
Question 1. Why are habits more reliable than motivation?
If you said, because habits don't depend on how we feel, you're correct. Question 2, and this one is just for you, listener. We don't have a right or wrong answer for this one. How could habits help you with learning English? Before we finish today's episode, Ben, I thought it might be nice to talk a little more personally about this topic.
Yeah, I agree. Because motivation sounds simple, but in real life, it can be really hard.
Exactly. And when I first read Atomic Habits, one of the biggest things that helped me was the idea that you don't need to feel motivated. You just need to make things easy to start.
Yeah, that idea completely changed how I think about goals.
For me, this really applied to working toward long-term projects. When I focused on the final result, I felt overwhelmed.
Same. I used to think I need to do everything perfectly, and if I couldn't, I would just stop.
But James Clear talks a lot about identity and small habits, becoming the kind of person who shows up regularly.
And that's so important for learning English.
I'll share a personal example. I love exercising and going to the gym, but when I was in university, I had the idea that I wanted to become a long-distance runner. You know, those people that compete in 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers races just for fun on the weekends. But I kept waiting for the right mood to go running.
That's cool. Those people are so dedicated.
Yeah, they are, but I wasn't. I joined a running group. I kept making excuses not to go after the first meeting. Every weekend I'd say, starting Monday, I'm going to run 5 kilometers every day this week. And then it would rain or I'd have a paper to write and I wouldn't do it. Like I said, I kept waiting for the right mood.
Which almost never comes.
Exactly. So instead, I decided to create a very small habit. Something so easy, I couldn't say no.
And that's one of the key ideas from the book.
Exactly. I decided that since I was going to the gym 3 or 4 days a week anyway, I would start my workout with just 10 to 20 minutes of running on the treadmill. From there, it was easy. I ran my first 10-kilometer race a year later.
That's awesome, Tara. Yeah, university was a time I kept setting big goals and losing motivation. There was so much I wanted to do, so much I wanted to achieve. I'd get totally overwhelmed and stressed out, and I'd just stop trying. But then I found Atomic Habits, the book we're talking about today. So I started making small habits too.
Yes. What did you do that helped you, Ben?
For example, instead of saying, I'll work for 3 hours straight with no break, I'd say, I'll work for 30 minutes and take a quick break. Or instead of saying, I need an A in this class, I'd say, let's try for an A on the next test.
And step by step, you did it.
Exactly. Once you start, it's easier to continue.
Right. And this is perfect for English learners. 5 minutes of listening, 1 short video, 1 page of reading.
That's how motivation grows, from action. For me, one idea from Atomic Habits that really helped was changing my environment.
Yes, that's such an important part of motivation.
I realized that when something was hard to access, I didn't do it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. So I started making the habits I wanted more visible.
How could English learners do that?
Great question. They could change their phone language to English or leave a notebook on their desk full of helpful phrases or vocabulary in English that they read every time they sit down at their desk, or subscribe to English podcasts.
Or even listen to English while cooking or walking.
Right. You don't always need extra time. You just need a better system.
I think one of the biggest problems English learners have is that they feel discouraged when progress feels slow.
Yes, and language learning is slow. That's normal.
But James Clear reminds us that progress is often invisible at first.
You don't notice it day to day, but over time, it adds up.
So if you're learning English and thinking, I'm not improving, that doesn't mean it's not working. It just means you're in the middle of the process.
So let's bring this all together. Motivation doesn't always come first.
Action creates motivation.
Small habits are more powerful than big goals.
And consistency matters more than perfection.
If you're learning English, remember this. You don't need to feel motivated every day.
You just need to show up, even for just 5 minutes. And if you're listening to this podcast right now, that means you did show up today.
Which means you're already doing the hard part.
I think it might be helpful to ask our listeners a few reflection questions.
Yeah, you don't need to answer perfectly. Just think about them.
What is one small habit you could build to support your English learning?
And what could you do to make that habit easier?
Could you connect it to something you already do every day?
That's called habit stacking, another great idea from the book. So, if there's one thing we'd like you to take away from today's episode, it is this. Action comes before motivation, so take action today, and motivation will follow.
And sometimes you don't need more motivation. You need a system that supports you. Small habits, small changes. Even listening to an English podcast for 5 minutes while you get ready for work or school will bring you closer to your goal.
So keep showing up, even on the days when you don't feel like it.
Especially on those days. Thanks so much for listening.